I know I'm not alone in feeling this pull for a brand refresh. And recently, I refreshed my website, this podcast, and also a few of my programs. So I wanted to share with you how I knew it was time and some things that you might take into consideration to see if it's time for your brand refresh as well.
This is the Authentic Brand Builders Podcast with Michelle Knight.
Welcome to the Authentic Brand Builders Podcast. This is the first official episode of the new podcast with the new branding, and I am so excited that you are here with me. Oh, it's just so cool. And it's so in alignment with what I'm talking about today in regards to a brand refresh. What does that mean? How do you know it's time? And what are some of the repercussions of that? Because as you can probably tell from this podcast, if you've been listening for a while, that when I started to realize that the brand as a whole needed to go through some changes, step into a new chapter, the podcast also followed suit. So while we have a new name, the Authentic Brand Builders Podcast, and I'm so excited that you are here as a fellow Authentic Brand Builder, all previous episodes under Brandmerry Podcast are still in the archive. So you can go back and listen to any of the 105 episodes that were previously done under the old branding. Now you can expect the same awesome tips, tools, and vulnerable episodes as usual. But it felt really aligned for me to create more of a community around the podcast. So, Authentic Brand Builder, are you ready to talk about a brand refresh? I hope you are. Because I recently updated my entire website, and it was complicated, as most technology is, but it only took me 2 weeks. Now, it was supposed to be released early, but I got sick and got COVID and didn't work on anything. But the actual work that I did was 2 weeks. So how did I do it in just 2 weeks? Next week's episode, I'm going to share more behind the scenes of the challenges that I faced and the actual process that I went through to give my existing brand a refresh. But today I want to talk about how I knew it was time. And I want to share with you 4 ways that you can kind of gauge if it might be time for you to do the same thing. Now, I want to take it back to the beginning of 2022. Okay. At the beginning of 2022, I started to feel like my existing brand wasn't in alignment with what was happening in my life. You know, we had recently stopped traveling full time, although we were still taking really great long trips, like spending 3 months in Greece, not complaining about that over here. But so much of what my online home base, my website represented was really around this full-time travel life. Obviously, I had grown a lot as a person through those years. I had discovered a lot of really great things about myself. And I was starting to get this thing in the back of my brain. I don't even know how to describe it, but this little thing that was like something feels a little off. Now, just because I was feeling that didn't mean that I didn't show up and take action. And I want to be super clear on that because I think when it comes to branding, especially when it comes to updating your brand, there's this idea that everything must stop so that you can fix those things and they need to be fixed immediately to step forward. But this, for me, it was so small and it can be really easy to, second guess yourself or wonder if things are working or, come up with excuses or whatever it is. I'm the queen of excuses over here. And I was just kind of wondering, is this legit? And so through 2022, I continued to show up with my brand in the same way that I had been showing up. And I started to experiment a little bit more. I started to integrate more brand storytelling into my emails again, something I had done way back in 2017, 2018, 2019, but had drifted off a bit up until that point. And I started to experiment, and in October of 2022, I updated my website. Okay, so I updated my website. I did a complete brand overhaul. I did not change much of the copy, but I did change the overall vibe because again, this feeling in the back of my head that something needed to change, something needed to shift was growing a little bit bigger. But I didn't know what it was. again, I continued to show up. I continued to create a 6-figure revenue generating business. I continued to serve my clients, and I continued to explore behind the scenes what this looked like. It wasn't instant, and that's what I really want to drive home in this episode. It was not an instant change. But then in the summer of 2023, after doing a lot of personal work on myself, going to therapy, uncovering a lot of things, changing my priorities, changing the things that I love. I talk a lot about hobbies in one of the last episodes of 2023 and finding my love of gardening and stepping into the role of homeschooling my son. We bought a freaking house. Like, I had changed. And I just feel like I knew then in October of 2023 what I needed to do, right? I had spent the last almost year and a half experimenting and seeing, like, what was I being called to do? What was I being pulled to do? Really evaluating how I loved showing up on my business, what I loved talking about. And yes, I had that luxury to do it for a longer period of time because I already had an established business. I had already made a name for myself. I had already created the SEO traffic, which brought people to my website every single day. I already had an email list. I already had established offers. So no, there wasn't that much of an urgency to change it all overnight, but it did happen. Right then in October, I was like, we've got to do something different. And I spent the next month really evaluating what that different meant to me. And it became very clear that because I had changed and because I am the center of my brand, that the brand needed to shift as well. Now, here's the thing that I think is so fun and also interesting. If you have been around Brandmerry, let's say prior to 2020, you probably will look at the new website and say, a lot of this looks really familiar because I've been doing and talking about the same things all these years. Brand storytelling being the center, branding being the center. But I had started to dabble more in talking about marketing because, as like with you, I have a lot of talents, right? I'm good at a lot of things. I have a lot of strengths. I also have a lot of weaknesses. We won't talk about those today, but I have a lot of strengths. And I think it's important to experiment and play and see what you love. And I absolutely loved talking about SEO and talking about Pinterest on the podcast. And I loved talking about it, in my courses. And I launched Brandmerry Academy, which was all about marketing. And I did that for 2 full years. I loved every second of it, but I started to miss this aspect of my brand and my services really being centered around branding. How did I get there? How did I realize that this was true? I started experimenting more and more with my content. And this might not have been something that you witnessed, but I knew it was happening, where I would talk about marketing for like a week, and then I would start talking about branding, and I would challenge myself to create, trainings on brand storytelling. And the more that I played with these different topics, the more that I could literally feel in my body what I loved teaching. What lit me up? What was most in line with my mission? Now, just because I have chosen to redirect and recenter my brand really around branding, brand storytelling, the messaging, it doesn't mean that I'm not still serving my clients with the marketing, with the SEO, right? I have a client who we're working on her YouTube channel. I have a client who's redoing her whole website and we're optimizing her SEO. That knowledge didn't change. But I really wanted to think about, how am I showing up on the front end of my business? What are the things that I love? What are the things I want to talk about on this podcast? What are the different things that I want to be interviewed about? And creating a central message around that. Now, could all of this change in the next 2 years? Absolutely. And that is okay. And this is something that I've been talking about on my Instagram, Michelle Knight Co., for a few weeks now, where I've been talking about, your brand is never final. Well, I've been talking about that forever, but the past couple of weeks, I've been talking about your brand is never final. There are fundamental pieces like your strengths, the problem that you solve, your ideal customer, who you want to work with, your messaging, those key things that you want to talk about, create content around. Establishing those 3 pillars and then starting to just show up. Because had I not been creating content, I probably would not have had this realization. I wouldn't have been experimenting and testing. Now, if you're listening to this and you're like, okay, a lot of things that you are saying, Michelle, are how I'm feeling. I feel like something is off, but I don't know what it is. Great, totally cool, and absolutely normal. Do you know how many entrepreneurs I've known in my 8 years of running my business? Yes, we are celebrating 8 years in April. How many entrepreneurs I know that have pivoted, have changed, have completely scrapped their existing brand and started a new one, have started a second one to experiment. This is all part of the process, my friends. But what I really want you to take away from this episode, and specifically the 4 things that I'm gonna summarize and share with you, is that A, it doesn't happen every single time something's not working, right? There's an evaluation process. And B, you still show up. You still show up. Even if behind the scenes, you're rebuilding your entire website from 7.0 on Squarespace to 7.1, optimizing all your SEO, changing all your images and designing it yourself, which is exactly what I did. I still was showing up for my clients. I still was showing up on social media. I was still sending emails. I was still showing up. And again, next week, I'm going to share with you how I was able to do that, how I did it efficiently, and was still able to show up, because I totally get it. It is time consuming. There were some late nights that I had to sacrifice in order to get to this point and get the website out into the world. But it doesn't have to take you forever to make these shifts. The testing process, the evaluation process, the checking your alignment process, sure, that could take a couple months to figure out what exactly you want to do. And I think that's another great example from my story. Last year in 2 years ago now, in 2022, I redid my website. I was not ready to redo my website. I was not ready, right? And I spent a lot of time redoing it. I was still in the process. I don't regret redoing it back then, because I think it also made me realize, oh, this isn't right. But I didn't change it right away. I gave myself another almost a year of looking at it and evaluating and trying to really pinpoint what was off so that I could make it correct the next time. You're going to make mistakes if you're deciding to go through a brand refresh, just like you're going to make mistakes in the branding process from time to time. It's all really an experiment and how you pay attention to that experiment. So that kind of leads me to 4 things that I want to share with you. It might be time for a brand refresh on your end as well. So number 1 is your offers are changing. Now, this is probably the most obvious one. If you currently offer something and you're not offering it anymore, or you have a specific offer that you no longer enjoy, right? Just happens, and you're wanting to create something new, that would be a time to really look at your existing brand. Now, in this case, I don't necessarily think you need an entire brand refresh unless what you are doing has really shifted. So for me, this wasn't really an indicator that I needed a brand refresh. I could very easily just say, this program's not available anymore, this program is available, and it all could have lived under the existing Brandmerry umbrella because of the way that I built my brand. But there were some offer shifts and are some offer shifts happening on my end. One of them is that we are no longer taking enrollments inside of Brandmerry Academy, which was my marketing membership. It's still there. I'm still serving my clients at the highest level. We still have the best freaking time in there. But I'm no longer offering that as a thing that you can join, because I didn't want my emphasis to be 100% on marketing. And that is obviously one of the things that membership was about. And then I'm adding something that I almost can't believe has taken me this long to create, and that's a brand storytelling, digital storytelling course, which is coming out in February. Enrollment will open in February. And that, again, that was just one of those moments that I said, it's time. This excites the shit out of me to create this, and it's needed, and I'm really good at it, and I've been talking about it for years. I needed to just own that next chapter. So for you, it might be very clear, like, oh, my offers are really changing, my ideal customer is changing. Evaluate that process and see, okay, does that work under my existing brand umbrella, or do I need to rebrand because of the ideal customer, because of the problem that I'm solving, because of the overall messaging? And that could be an indicator for you. The second thing, and something I've already talked about, is that experiment with your content. If you are feeling like something is off, maybe you struggle to talk about a certain topic because it takes you a long time to create content around it, you're just not feeling it. Maybe you've been talking about it for a long time and it's just like, bleh. You know what I mean? Like, I've talked about this before. I love teaching SEO in terms of working with a client and helping them optimize their SEO or creating a mini course around it. But I don't like creating social media content around it. I'm like, okay, well, I just don't really love talking about it. And that's okay. That's just me. But I could talk all day, every day of the year around branding and brand storytelling, right? So what I encourage you to do if you are feeling this is experiment with your content. You know, say, okay, for a week, I'm going to talk about this topic. Maybe it's something you've already been talking about. Really evaluate how it feels, how long it takes you, what your creativity and inspiration feel like. Now, maybe experiment with a different topic the next week. Maybe go back to something you used to talk about and haven't in a while. See how that feels. Give yourself a solid 30 days to kind of experiment with different things. This is also something, by the way, I recommend that you do in the beginning of the branding process to really figure out what you love and what you don't love. This is an ongoing experimentation, but it's a really great way to say, I might be good at this. This might be something that I'm very skilled in, but I don't love talking about it. And if you don't love talking about it, guess what? You won't talk about it. And if you're an online business owner, you need to create some content. So you might as well enjoy the process. So experimentation for me really is everything. I've talked about this many times. When it comes to data, I love data. And it's not just like the numbers. It's also like the data that my body is telling me. You know, like if I post this, I feel like crap. If I post this, I love it. I'm excited. Give me more of that. So experiment with your content. It's a really, really great way to determine if it's time for a brand refresh. And then if you determine, okay, I don't really love talking about this anymore, go back to your existing brand and say, okay, what parts of my messaging do I need to shift? Because you're probably going to find that some of those key messages need to shift, and that'll indicate, are you changing your programs? Are you changing your website? What exactly are you ultimately shifting? All right, the third thing is what's your long-term vision? And I think this is important to talk about because I don't hear it talked about that often, but your long-term vision can change. It doesn't make it a short-term vision. It just means that things have changed. You might have a clear picture of what you want your brand to be, you know, how you want to feel, how you want to show up in the world, the mission that you have, 5-year, 10-year vision. And 3 years in, things change. Maybe life happens. You yourself are growing and evolving. Maybe the astrology has changed, you know, like whatever it is has changed. And that's no longer something you're super in alignment with. So you create a new long-term vision. That's different than these short-term visions where we're like, for the next 60 days, we're going to do this, or this year, I'm going to focus on this. It's okay if the long-term vision changes or shifts. And so if that's happening for you, it's probably time for a brand refresh because you want this representation of your brand. You know, I'm thinking my website specifically. You want this representation of your brand to feel good, to represent what your brand stands for, where it is going, what has changed in the past. You know, one of the things that I have shared with this new website is I rewrote my About Me page for the first time since I launched my website. Yes, it has been almost 8 years, a little less, since I rewrote my About Me page. Now, I've helped thousands of entrepreneurs write their own About Me pages with my freebies, with podcasts, working one-on-one with clients, but I hadn't done mine. And with this refresh, I had that realization that so much of my journey had shifted. And there were parts of my journey that I wanted to highlight in my new founder story. And I owned that, and I rewrote that puppy in no time because it just flowed, because it felt so aligned. It felt really in alignment with the long-term vision and how I'm wanting to show up and support entrepreneurs. If your long-term vision has shifted, maybe even your mission has shifted, that is okay too. It will most likely be an indication that the foundational pieces of your brand are shifting as well, and it's time to revisit them and give it a nice refresh. And finally, number 4, and this kind of piggybacks off of, the long-term vision, it's just that you've changed. You are a growing individual. Hopefully, you are growing in some way every month, every year. And sometimes we don't necessarily see it happening until we look in the mirror one day and we go, I am not the same. I am not the same person. And a big thing for me this last year in my personal life has been such an evolution in terms of, I openly talk about going to therapy and healing childhood wounds and in my inner perfectionist, right? Speaking kindly to myself. The things that I know you are also, it was such an aggressive point if you're watching on YouTube. It was a dancy point. That I know you are also going through, right there with you, okay? So much had shifted. I've openly talked about grief. Grief doesn't you don't go through it in 30 days. You go through it year after year after year. These were all things that I was changing. We also changed our lifestyle quite a bit, and I found such a connectedness to simplicity, to a simple life, look, let's call it what it is. I bake bread, I garden, I preserve, I'm closing in on homesteading, real fast. These were things that were shifting in me and in my life, and they were also kind of being infused in my branding slowly. So again, I really believe that you create a personal brand. If you are in consulting, coaching, service-based, it's a non-negotiable. Digital products, all of that. I really think it's a non-negotiable. If you have a product, I highly encourage it, but some people fight with me on this. So we're just gonna, I highly encourage it. People want to know the person behind the brand. We know this to be true. They want to see what's going on. They want to see how do you interact in your everyday life? What are the things that you do? It doesn't mean that you're an open book on the internet, but it does mean that you invite people in. I started inviting people in. I started showing this process of falling in love with gardening, baking my bread in the morning, and it started to impact my content, and it started to impact how I was talking about running a business. And slowly but surely, it started to shift my beliefs around being a business owner and an entrepreneur. So it was changing at a very deep level to the point where I couldn't show up as the older version of myself anymore. It wasn't in alignment. It didn't feel good. Now, for 90% of you, you're going to be literally don't even notice a change, Michelle. That's fine. That's great, actually. But I needed to make this happen because I'm the one that's showing up for my clients. I'm the one that's writing the copy. I'm the one creating the content, the videos, the podcast, all of the things. And I don't know about you, but I want to love this process. There have been many times where I have gotten close to that burnout that we hear about a lot. And I have watched entrepreneur and business owner after business owner and after over and over and over again close down because of burnout, take sabbaticals and not come back. I've seen it. I know we've all seen it. I'm not interested in getting to that point because I know the repercussions of that for my family, for my mental health, for my physical health, for my emotional health. And as I've said, this business is not here to deplete my life. It is here to enhance it, to give me all of the things that I ultimately want. That's why I became an entrepreneur. And so I want to show up in an inspired way. And I want how I'm choosing to show up in this season of life, the things that inspire me, the things that light me up, the things that are an important value in the message that I want to share. I want those to be reflected in all aspects of my branding. And so if you're also experiencing that or thinking about that, it's probably time for a brand refresh. So those are my 4. That's 10. Again, on YouTube. If you're not watching these on YouTube, you all need to start watching these videos on YouTube, because sometimes I feel like I'm orchestrating over here. My hands are constantly moving. So I shared 4 things, but I think at the end of it all, it's really about the alignment. Do you feel aligned with your existing brand? If not right now, okay, let's start experimenting. Let's see what's coming up for you. Let's see what's going on. You don't have to change it tomorrow. In fact, I don't recommend it. Go through the process, but still keep showing up. Still keep doing the things. This is the juggling act of entrepreneurship, right? You gotta still show up on the front end and make all these awesome updates on the back end. Now, one of the things I also really started to feel was that I missed community, right? I missed community outside of my paid clients. And so this question actually on like, how did I know it was time for a brand refresh, came from my VIP channel over on Instagram. This year, I am dedicated to falling back in love with social media. And I think I'm doing okay so far. We're only a month in, but I think it's going well. And I started to ask myself, like, okay, well, what would make this more fun for me? Community, always. So I created a VIP channel. If you're not already part of it, you can go to my profile on Instagram, @MichelleKnightCo, and join the VIP channel right there. And I answer questions and I ask, what does everyone need help with? And this question came in, how did I know it was time for a refresh? And I wanted to answer that here on the podcast. But as I was thinking more about like showing up and building community, that really trickled into the podcast Rebrand. I wanted to create more of a community around this podcast. And fun fact, if you're here to the end, Authentic Brand Builders was actually the name of my very first Facebook group, my only Facebook group. Authentic Brand Builders. It was also the name of my first membership back in 2018, I think. That feels right. And I've owned the domain ever since. And so when I started to think about what I wanted this podcast to reflect, I was able to go back into the archives, the Brandmerry archives, and pull it out. Because for me, this has always been the underlying theme. How can I help you create an authentic brand? How can you create a brand that's really rooted in your story, your mission, your values? How do you create a brand where you get to honor those things? Where, yes, you have to show up and create content. Yes, you have to market your business. Yeah, you have to do these things because these are the fundamentals of getting your brand seen and paid. But how do you do it in the most authentic way possible for you? So I'm excited about this next chapter, which again feels more like a refresh than a complete rebrand. And I'm excited that you're along for the journey. If you would do me a huge solid and you would take a few minutes, if you've listened to this podcast for any amount of time and you have not written a review, I would love if you would just take a few minutes to write a review, rate on Spotify or on Apple Podcasts, or leave a comment on YouTube if you're watching this on YouTube. Because I love reading those and I love hearing what you have to say. And again, this is all part of building the community. And if you also feel like you are ready for a brand refresh and you want to chat a little bit more on how I can support you, go check out the new website, brandmerry.com, and go look at the different ways that we can work together. There's a fun, I don't know how fun it'll be for you to fill it out, but it's fun for me to read. There's a fun little inquiry form where you can share more about your business and what you're going through, hear a little bit more about my products, and we'll have a conversation about how I can ultimately support you in really going through let's call it a seamless brand refresh this year in 2024. I'll be back next week with another episode where I'm going to talk a little bit more about that process, what I went through, and some of the challenges that I face. So I will be back here, same place, same day of the week, and we'll be back with a new episode here on the Authentic Brand Builders podcast. See you soon.